Welcome to the wild ride of Old Put, a story of the American Revolution. You might wonder why the good folk of Greenwich, Connecticut have what is probably their busiest thoroughfare, named after an army man who lived over 200 years ago. Well, General Israel Putnam was his name, and he's responsible for a local legend. As a result, his name is just about everywhere in Greenwich today. He pops up all over the place. You might also wonder how many of the residents of this beautiful town are aware that in General Putnam's day, Greenwich was named Horseneck, a name that has remained in local memory. During the Revolutionary War, when the soldiers of King George III in New York City looked north, they saw that village lying like a boulder in their path to New England. As for General Putnam, in February 1779, he was in command of a winter camp in Reading, Connecticut. You know, this was quite a come-down. Major General Putnam, one of the very first major generals ever created in the Army of the United States, hero of the French and Indian War, in command at Bunker Hill, General Putnam was now reduced to this: in charge of recruiting and stationed in this winter camp. Well, it may be a beautiful park today. It was a place of misery then. Anyone seeing this park in the winter can get at least an idea of the conditions of that time. The soldiers living in freezing temperatures without proper clothing or housing, with little in the way of food or pay. This was Putnam's Valley Forge. And he was here because his friend, his commander, had perhaps thought he was too old, too stout, too over the hill. In his statues and portraits, Putnam usually looks stern, severe. Well, he was the very model of a modern major general, but according to historians, he was usually more relaxed. When he visited a place like Knapp's Tavern, for example, he was a good deal like Shakespeare's Falstaff. He was stout, somewhat advanced in age, but a man of hearty good fellowship. Folks called him Old Put. And it seems he liked to party. In fact, some say before the attack by the British, he'd been out all night and didn't get to bed till daylight. Once awake, however, he learned that the redcoats were all around here, and he was outnumbered 10-1. Only one thing to do: ride to Stamford for reinforcements. He leaped on his horse and rode off, the enemy close behind. He came to a precipice and just leaped over it, riding dangerously down the steep hillside. For the British, capturing an American major general would be quite a triumph, especially if it was the one responsible for that "don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes" remark. But they stopped the chase and remained at the edge of the cliff, watching Old Put with amazement as he and his horse scrambled down on the rocks and boulders. In Reading's Putnam Park, there's a remarkable statue of the general, shown here while restoration work was being done on it. Putnam has just recklessly leaped over the precipice and is on his way down the steep hill, turning to shout his defiance at the pursuers. He then raced down the post road, which didn't look much like this in those days. He galloped past the mill pond in Coscob, across the Mill River into Stamford, and he wound up here in the center of the town to rally the troops. While this was going on in Stamford, the Tories back in Horseneck were cleaning out the place. They loaded up their wagons with everything they could lift: food, money, jewelry, pots and pans, grandfather clocks, even some of the Horseneck liquor of that day. They then hauled their loot over the Byram River and headed back home. Home being New York City. Well, that's the story of the wild ride of General Putnam, who raced to get reinforcements to drive the enemy from Greenwich. It's important to emphasize that as a result, the Redcoats didn't capture Horseneck. They just stripped it clean. Why did that hasty descent down a rocky precipice by a stout old fellow on a horse become such a legend around these parts? Why is this event now on the official seal of the town of Greenwich? Well, with that courageous ride, General Putnam made a point that cold February day well over 200 years ago. He thought there were things worth risking your life for. Freedom, independence, to name a couple.